Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
We assume that's the Bahamas. 544 miles per hour, 46, 56 degrees.
What a great film, right? What a great celebration of science and scientists and women scientists. Very sexy, very sexy. So in any case, Emmy, I want you to have a seat. We're going to take questions from the audience. I hope there will be some questions for this mathematician from MIT. It's very intimidating being next to a MIT grad. Any other MIT grads? Oh, okay. No. Oh, you are, Peter. That's great. Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're going to get into that. And actually, because we're taping this, I want you to ask that question again. But I need for you to have one mic. So I'm going to give you my mic, and I'll share one mic with Emmy. Otherwise, it won't show up on tape. And that is one of our first questions, is the whole issue of sort of gender inequality in NASA or in general the sciences. So why don't you go ahead?
My name is Rachel Seaman. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. Thank you for being here today with us. Just wondering, out of whatever, curiosity, whether you or any of your colleagues have experienced any gender prejudices today or yesterday.
I would say yes, absolutely. It's much more subtle than, certainly like pre-civil rights era, like most forms of sexism, I would say. Oh, sorry about this. I would say that mathematics in general, in academia, is probably about 10% women, and so that's something that kind of raises eyebrows, right? There's certainly a lot of effort to have more women interested, have more women stay longer in the field, and it's not really clear exactly what's the cause of this. There's not much kind of direct sort of sexism, I would say, but there's a lot of kind of maybe just sort of an assumption of like less respect about your work, maybe, is probably the most visible thing that you would see.
I think earlier, while we were having a conversation, you discussed with me that oftentimes when you came to work, especially as a professor at MIT, proving 10 theorems in your career, which is, to me, amazing. I've never proved a theorem. But they assumed that you were someone's assistant. Could you elaborate on that?
So this is something that happened. It's not uncommon that, like, if I come across someone in the hall who's like visiting the department, they may assume that I'm part of the staff, part of like the, and that's, I think not only like being a woman, but also being younger and, things like this tend to, people will make assumptions, I guess. It's nice to be able to say like, oh, no, I'm faculty, like, that's fine.
Do you know if they still check in the space program, if they still check numbers longhand, or do they just do it completely by computer now?
I don't know for sure. I'm not being involved in the space program at all, but I would be extremely surprised if they did anything by hand. It's interesting in that, that there used to be a lot more kind of maybe hierarchy structure, because there'd be people who are sort of developing the math, but then because there isn't computers, there would have, well, computers who are people just to kind of crunch numbers. And so that would be like kind of a job, or like large collection of jobs, as kind of shown in the movie. But yeah, I think computers have more or less eliminated all of this. Like,
Well, Emmy, maybe you can mention in terms of your own work, how the process begins, and how dependent you are on a say digital computation or digital programs to help you sort of flesh out a problem and the various solutions that might arise. Are you doing things in your head? I know that some mathematicians just see numbers magically in their head and see it all kind of lining up and stuff. At least that's the way movies portray it, right? How much do you still use like your brain and writing things down and figuring it out on a chalkboard versus just punching stuff into a computer?
So for myself, it may be quite different from something like in the space program, where it's much closer to engineering. So because I'm in pure mathematics, what that involves is much more theorem proving and constructing arguments and things like this. And so because of that, there's almost no computation that I actually do, so by hand or by computer. Most of what I rely on a computer for actually is formatting, just like typing papers, which actually, this is also a job that's been eliminated in the last, whatever, few decades. It used to be that there would be kind of large secretarial staff who would type papers up for professors, but nowadays this doesn't happen anymore. But that's really all I use computers for. Different mathematicians, depending on kind of how applied they are, or how, just what kind of math they do, may use computers, more or less. But
I had a question. What percentage of women on the MIT faculty at the present time?
I believe there's 4 of us presently, which is, I think it's on the order of like 5%. And actually, I hate to say this, but this is actually something that I'm kind of proud of. Like, I mean, in some ways, like 5% is terrible, but compared to many universities, I mean, so Harvard, for example, has 0.
Wow. That's amazing.
I found this to be a fairly emotionally charged film, and many of the elements of that had to do with the gender issues, but some were much more to do with the realization of the purity of the mathematics, the recognition of, I mean, there was a moment where Catherine figures out the return window in front of all those guys, and that, to me, that felt like a beautiful moment. You could see the people sort of aghast with it. Now, I'm aware this is applied mathematics, and your branch is much purer than that. And I think one of the reasons, the assumption that men are, more natural at math is it's about logic. But there's an emotional component which came out of this film very strongly, and I wonder if you ever feel that when you're recognizing something that, hasn't been seen before, or
absolutely. Like that's the best part of the job, I would say, is that moment when things sort of click and everything kind of makes sense is really the certainly my favorite part of the job. It's probably like math is sort of very frustrating in that that's like maybe 1% of the job, and 99% of the time you're just kind of banging your head against the wall and just like stuck and you're frustrated. And so that maybe makes this 1% all the sweeter, I guess.
Yeah, I was a math major in college, and I had a professor who taught the history of mathematics. Okay, and I had a professor who taught the history of mathematics, and I got very involved and interested in it. And in the movie, they moved to Euclid's theorem, I think is what they were trying to say. I'm not sure. But is that factual? Is that what they did? They went back to an old mathematical way of looking at things?
So as I recall, I think it was something called Eulers Method, which is absolutely something which is real mathematics and also still useful, I guess. It's something that's used not specifically for dynamics or physics or something. It's kind of just a method to find solutions to an equation, kind of approximately. But yeah, it's absolutely something which is real and commonly used. I'm not so sure, but I imagine it's even part of like how computer algorithms run to do that sort of thing, like use this method just kind of programmed into the computers.
What methods or branches of mathematics were used, tensor calculus, vector analysis, that type of thing, to analyze the orbits?
Probably not even anything that complicated, I would say. Certainly no tensors, I don't think. Vectors, maybe, but even then, I mean, it's sort of, so, sorry to use like sort of technical jargon, but yeah, I think roughly what goes into these type of problems is a type of mathematical physics called Lagrangian Mechanics, and then that together with just sort of, I guess, analytic geometry, just kind of conic sections and such.
Just out of curiosity, what we saw there, was that really the real math that they probably used? Was that woman writing actual, true math that they would have applied at that for those reasons?
Yes, yeah, I believe so. I mean, it's sort of hard to tell, like with just flashes of frames, like during a movie, but is kind of everything that I saw looked like what I would write, I guess.
In the movie we saw one woman in math and we saw one woman engineer. And when I graduated from college in '63 in engineering, we had one woman engineer. And I'm just curious, in your view and what you've seen, what we need to do that can stimulate and encourage, especially young women, because they're all so bright, to try and pursue and get the rewards of the satisfaction of the field that you're in.
That's an extremely complicated question, I would say. So this is very much a non-answer, but to somewhat turn it around, I would say one of the largest problems today rather than kind of seeding that initial interest, is actually retention of women. If you look at mathematics majors among like undergraduates, is actually fairly egalitarian. But you go, every time you go from undergrad to grad school, and then from a doctoral program to a postdoc, and then from postdoc to professors, every one of these kind of rungs of the ladder, you lose, 5 to 10% kind of drop of the gender balance. And I can't really say why that is, and yeah, that certainly has a lot to do with it. Yeah, and as far as how to help, that's an even more difficult question, I would say, than knowing why it happens. I think it's probably a lot of subtle things mostly, but yeah.
I think this is just a personal question for me, but what inspired you to pursue math at such a period in time when I remember you gave me statistics that the first female woman to win that was in 2014. I think you said it was called the Freedom Award.
The Fields Medal.
Fields Medal, sorry, which is kind of like the Nobel Prize in mathematics. And the film was made. This movie Hidden Figures was back in the 50s, and now we're thinking about 2014, and that's a long period of time, and we haven't been able to break those barriers. And like, how did that affect you?
So first, I would say that there's. I wouldn't at all say that no barriers have been broken, and I mean, certainly there are issues today, but today compared to 10 years ago, not to mention 50 years ago, things I think are much improved. With Mariam Mirzakhani, who won the Fields Medal, which was sort of a big deal in the math community, being the first woman to win the Fields Medal. Also the first Iranian to win the Fields Medal, which, certainly racial representation is also a major issue. But yeah, for me personally, like, of course, it's great to see these things. Like, it's very encouraging. It's very, it really makes me feel like things are changing, and it is possible to make a difference and these sort of things. And so, yeah, it's nothing but good. Yes, but I mean, well, it depends what you mean in math, I guess. So jobs in math could be like either jobs as like professional math professors in like the academic bubble, but it could also mean, certainly many careers like involve a lot of mathematics. Academia specifically is extremely competitive for anybody, I would say. And because of that, it's sort of, it makes it so that universities, particularly top-tier universities, can sort of pick the very kind of best of the best type of people. And so asking if there's jobs for women, there's not really jobs for anybody except like the very, you know.
Yeah. I did want to mention, just to underscore or add to your question, I was reading recently that the average salary for a math undergraduate degree holder is $110,000. That's average. Now, there are, like Emmy said, outside of academia and going into professorships, there is a great need for mathematicians.
Yeah, and to sort of build on this, yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe a bit unfair to say that I mean, academia is kind of a very small world. The majority of people, I think, who major in math end up going into the private sector or into government work, and there are many jobs there. I mean, not only and in fact, many jobs which are much more lucrative than academia, I have to say. Like, you know, being in finance or something make a lot more money than being a professor. So yeah, I mean, I think in general, having a mathematical background is very much an asset and makes you a very employable person in many fields. Consulting is another major one, where people will just sort of work for companies that work for other companies to sort of advise engineers when problems get too hard for the people they have employed and such. So yeah, math is maybe interesting in that way, in that the career prospects are very broad and can go in many different directions, I guess.
Okay. Well, let's take one last question. That gentleman up at the top.
What's the real dynamic of STEM into university?
That I would say is much less competitive, much more kind of fostering. Yeah, again, I should maybe kind of temper my. I think these competitive aspects really only come into play, sort of, when you're getting your doctorate or even past this. The majority of people who get degrees in math do not go into grad school, and I mean, I think that's great. I think that there's, you know, certainly many jobs which don't require that. In fact, there's not really a good reason to get a doctorate in mathematics unless you kind of want to be a, you know, professor, basically. And so because of that, I think there's much more opportunities and much more of a collaborative spirit. I have to say, I'm regularly very impressed by the students at MIT in that they will form study groups in order to work together and you know, really kind of lift each other up rather than compete against each other, or, you know, and yeah, I think that, well, and even in academia, I mean, it's competitive in sort of a professional way, but I don't think people are cutthroat or anything. Sorry, that was kind of rambly. I'm not sure if that answers your question, or